Thanks very much, Mr. Chairman. And thanks, Mr. Jones. I just have a few wrap-up questions on some key issues we've been discussing. And so let's start with preemption. Doesn't the Udall-Vitter bill grandfather in permanently all state chemical-specific regulations that were in place January 1st, 2015?
That's correct.
So if a state has already acted, even if EPA takes up the chemical, even if EPA says you can drink this and you'll have a great life, that state regulation is still in effect.
That is saved. That's correct.
Okay. Doesn't the Udall-Vitter bill grandfather in California's Proposition 65?
That's correct.
Okay. Doesn't it keep in place any state regulation that exists prior to the EPA taking up a chemical until the EPA makes a conclusion in its study?
That's correct.
So if a state has a regulation on a chemical that EPA takes up, that regulation doesn't go away unless and until EPA essentially blesses the chemical.
Or regulates it, yes.
Correct.
Yes.
Or regulates it. Okay. And then there was this discussion of industry priorities and how somehow that's some grand conspiracy to get rid of state regulations, which it isn't. Isn't it true that EPA has complete discretion over accepting or denying those requests, over accepting or denying that money in that request to take up any certain chemical?
That's correct. And as I mentioned, we are also limited under the bill to only 15% of all priorities can come from that stream. But we have complete discretion in how we determine what the priority is.
And to go directly to Senator Markey's question, isn't it true that when EPA takes up a chemical through this particular route, then in fact the preemption rules are different? And in fact, states can act while you're studying the chemical, completely contrary to what Senator Markey said, until EPA makes a final decision.
That's correct. For chemicals that come in through that venue, the preemption rules are different.
So for that particular path, the rules are different and more allowing of the state regulations to continue.
Yes.
Okay. Let me go to this issue of the 25 chemicals over so many years. I just want to be very clear so everyone is clear. That is a minimum. That's a floor, correct?
That's what we are statutorily be required to do, yes.
Yeah. And in fact, the Udall-Vitter bill gives EPA more authority, correct?
We can do more than we can do more. Yes, it does.
And the Vitter-Udall bill gives EPA more resources through user fees, correct?
Yes.
And it gives EPA more resources through this route of chemical companies being able to supplement your budget even though you retain all control. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And so obviously if you zoom past 25, if you get to 40, if you go past 40, there's no ceiling. There's nothing in the law preventing you from doing that.
No ceiling.
Okay. And then a final comment, which is simply that, you know, we're talking about this in the context of environmental regulation. We're the Environmental Committee. But I would suggest this bill is at least as similar, maybe more similar to product regulation when the federal government regulates products in commerce, because these chemicals go into products in commerce. And so I think we need to have the preemption discussion in that context. I think when we do, you see that these sorts of rules are the norm and not the exception. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.